Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Hidden Human Story of Radio with your host, Rita Jean Moran. Today is Saturday, August 24th, 2013, and I am your host, Rita Jean Moran. I decided to do a show today because over the next couple weeks I'm going to be pretty busy, and I'm not sure when the next show will be, although I would advise to subscribe, and that way you'll know as soon as the next show is scheduled. You can take a look at my blog in the meantime and my Facebook, and I usually post a lot of things on there. Like I said, over the next 2 weeks I have a lot of things going on. I'm working on another book to sum up a lot of the story that I've been telling on the last several shows. And I want to start getting a stronger YouTube presence where I'm able to not only just discuss this information, but also show a lot more graphics as well, so that when I start getting into some discussions of the symbolism and similarities, there could be a visual reference. Well, today I want to talk about Polynesia, Africa, and some of their mythologies and religions, and at the end, hopefully, I'll have some time to get into shamanism. Well, Polynesia is a subregion of Oceania made up of over 1,000 islands scattered over central and southern Pacific Ocean. And the indigenous people who inhabit the islands of Polynesia are termed Polynesians, and they share many traits, including language, culture, and beliefs. They were experienced sailors, and they used the stars to navigate during the night. Now, the term Polynesia was first used in 1756 by the French writer Charles de Brossay, and it applied to all of the islands in the Pacific. And in 1831, Jules Dumont d'Urville proposed a restriction on its use during a lecture to the Geographical Society of Paris. Okay, now Polynesia is, like I said, characterized by a lot of land or small areas of land spread out over 70 million square miles in the Pacific Ocean. Now, many of the Polynesian islands include the Hawaiian Islands, Samoa, New Zealand, Norfolk Island, and hopefully as we go through, I'll catch a couple other ones here. Okay. Now, Polynesia is generally defined as the islands within the Polynesian Triangle. When I went to Hawaii, they had a cultural center, and they talked about this as well. I've been to Maui, and I've been to Oahu, and like I said, it includes Hawaii, New Zealand, some say Easter Island, Samoa, Tonga, the Cook Islands, and several other islands. And there are some settlements of Polynesian, small ones, in Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands and Caroline Islands, and a couple other places. Now, Polynesia is a cultural term, and there are DNA studies that suggest that the indigenous Pacific Island population migrated from Taiwan thousands of years ago and dispersed throughout the region into three distinct cultural groups. And like I said, when I was in Hawaii, pretty much their stories talk of colonization through traveling on canoes from island to island. And when one island, kind of got filled up, or there was volcanic eruption or they wanted to continue, a group would get back in the canoes and go to another island. Okay. Let's see. Now, each group of Polynesians has slightly different names for their gods and goddesses, and there's slight differences, but generally when you start getting into the description, they're pretty much the same. Let's see now. In Tangaria, of great importance, is the god of the sea, Tangaroa is the god of the sea and of fishing. And there's often a story of the marriage between the sky and the earth. The New Zealand version, Renge and Papa, is a union that gives birth to the world and all things in it. There's stories of islands being pulled up from the bottom of the sea by a magic fish hook or thrown down from heaven. And all the cultures have stories of voyages, migrations, seductions and battles, and other heroes. They even have a story about a trickster, Maui, they have Maui. They're widely known as those. Okay, they are beautiful goddess or ancestress, Hina or Sina. So the trickster is, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, Mui. Now this is very similar to the trickster in North American culture, as well as the Greek Prometheus and Set in Egypt, and Loki in Nordic Odinic lore. And that just seems to be a common theme all across the globe. And those who are familiar with my work, I basically believe that all of these mythologies are talking about the same group of people, and that story's been given will be in my writing, with the latest book coming out, and in some of the earlier shows on this radio station. So if you need to review that, go back and listen to some of those earlier shows. Okay, most of the traditions and the stories of the pantheons of the Polynesians come from oral traditions. It was passed down orally, although now it's starting to get written down. And one of the interesting things about the Hawaiian Polynesian group is they have something called a kahuna. And a kahuna is a name for a priest, a sorcerer, a magician, a wizard, a minister, or an expert in any profession. And there are 40 different types of kahunas, and they range, like I said, from experts in herbal healing to experts in boat making. And when the missionaries came to Hawaii, they outlawed the kahuna, but and basically tried to basically introduce and force Christianity on the Polynesians. But there is a revival of the kahuna today. Now, the kahuna commune with the ancient gods to help them in their crafts, and the kahuna could be male or female. Now, this is very similar to what is known as a shaman, and I'll get into that discussion a little later in this show. One interesting thing I noted in my studies is the similarity in the name kahuna to the Kohens. Now, the Kohens are a patriarchal Jewish priest set, and it's a group that is determined by lineage. The Kohen word is used in the Torah to refer to priests, both Jewish and non-Jewish, such as the Jewish nation as a whole, as well as priests that they call Kohanim, and this is a Baal. During the existence of the temple in Jerusalem, Kohanim performed the daily and holiday duties of sacrificial offerings. So the word Kohen, Kohanim, they're very similar to kahuna. And Christian priests are referred to as Komer in Hebrew. Okay, so there were also, when I was in Hawaii, they had some at the cultural center, the Tahitian temples that were, or that had animal pens for pigs that were sacrificed to the gods of the temple. Now, the Jewish Kohens have 24 different types of Kohens as compared to the 40 kahunas. And King David assigned each of the 24 priestly clans to a weekly watch. So they all had tasks to do. And if you get into, or go on like Wikipedia and look up Kohen, and this is another reason why I want to get a little bit stronger YouTube presence, but there's a picture of a grave site. Excuse me, my cough is back. And on this grave site, a Kohanim blessing is shown. And it's basically the hand sign that the Vulcans used in Star Trek. But the two hands are put together to form a triangle, and then the other fingers are spread out to create a V. So, and then above it is a crown, and I find that interesting. When I get into some shows about Hollywood and music industry symbolism, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'll get into the Mendi people because they have separated priests and priestesses as well. So this seems to be a global thing. And Shintos, the Japanese, also have the same thing. So getting back to the Polynesian mythology in Hawaii, one of their most famous goddesses is Pele. And she is said to be the goddess that is responsible for the volcanic activity of the island. She is a goddess of fire, lightning, wind, and volcanoes. And there are many legends and stories about people on the island, usually the Big Island, meeting a mysterious woman who may be young or old. And she's really the goddess Pele in disguise. And there's a legend that Pele had red hair, and when she died, she was buried on an island off of Maui, but her spirit still roams the islands. And in one version of the Pele story, Pele is according to Wikipedia, is a daughter of Kane, Holaane, and Waimea in the mystical land of Kwahilane, a floating free land like Fata Morgana. Now, isn't that something? Kwahilane was in the region of Kahiki. She stays so close to her mother's fireplace with the firekeeper, Lona Makua. Her older sister, Namaka Okahai, a sea goddess, fears that Pele's ambition would smother the homeland and drives Pele away. Kamaholai drives Pele south in a canoe called Wanu Aikea with her younger sister Haiaika and with her brothers Kamahoali, Kane Melehai, and Kane Apawa, and arrives at the islets above Hawaii. Okay, and there Kane Melehai is left on Mukapapara, just a reef, to build it up in fitness for human residence. Nihai, 800 feet above the ocean, Apua, after her visit to Lihawa, and crowning a wreath of Kawanos, Pele feels sorry for her younger brother and picks him up again. Pele used the divining rod, Pa'oa, to pick her new home. A group of chants tell of a pursuit by Namakawakaike, and Pele is torn apart. Her bones, Kawai Pele, form a hill on Kahikanu, while her spirit escaped to the island of Hawaii. Now that's a very interesting goddess. You know, as I said, she's supposed to have reddish hair, and she had to leave her home with brothers, and ends up being killed and buried in Hawaii somewhere. There's 4 other main Hawaiian gods, Kukane, Lono, Kanaloa. That are male gods or aspects of Kane. That almost sounds like a Hindu concept. And 400 more gods and goddesses, and more gods and goddesses, and spirits and guardians. Now, another one of the gods of Hawaii was Lono, and he was an agricultural god. When I was in Oahu, they had a temple to him that was preserved, and it's rectangular, and there are 2 posts, and it's interesting because it follows almost like a Freemasonic or Jewish type temple, where it's or even Egyptian, and there's always these 2 pillars of some sort at the top, at the front of this temple. There are several folklores in Hawaii. One of them includes the Night Marchers. And according to Hawaiian legend, the Night Marchers are the ghosts of the ancient warriors, because other Polynesians would come and attack other Polynesians. Now, these Night Marchers supposedly roam large sections of the island chain, and they can be seen by groups of torches. They can usually be found in areas that were once large battlefields. On the island of Oahu, for example, Nuanu Pali is such a place. Now, the legend is if you look a Night Marcher straight in the eye, you will be forced to walk amongst them forever. But if you have a relative taken by them, you will be spared. Hawaiians say in the presence of night marchers, one should lie down on their stomach and avoid any kind of eye contact and stay quiet. Okay, the other folklore has to do with pork over Nuaha Pali, or the Pali Highway. And the folklore on the island of Oahu says that you should never carry pork over the Pali Highway connecting Honolulu and Windward Oahu, which is interesting because they do eat a lot of pork over there. The stories vary, but the legend is that if anyone's carrying pork of any kind over the old Pali Road by automobile, that car will stop at a certain point, and it won't start again until the pork is removed from the vehicle. Some versions say that if it has to do with raw pork, and others just say any pork in general. And this legend's roots, again, have to do with Pele and the demigod Kamapua, who was a half-man, half-pig. And the two of them had a turbulent relationship and agreed not to visit each other. That sounds like Isis and Set. If one takes, which by the way, I have to do a little more research, but I think the boar, which is like a pig, is sacred to Set. But I know the hippopotamuses and the Set animal that looks like a jackal, and the coyote would be a symbol of Loki. But I've read somewhere that I think it was the boar. It may have been sacred to Loki as well, but I need to look into that a little bit more. Okay. Another interesting thing in Hawaiian lore is when Captain James Cook came to the islands, he may have been thought to have been Lono returning, because Lono was supposed to have been in the flesh at one point and have visited the Polynesians, and he promised to come back after he left by the sea. Now, that to me sounds very much like the same story as Quetzalcoatl and Osiris. Again, he may have promised it, but he wasn't able to come back because he was eventually murdered over in Egypt by his brother and the conspirators. Okay, in Hawaiian mythology, Kane, or Cain, spelled Kane, is considered to be the highest of the four major Hawaiian gods. And the other three would be Kanaloa, Ku, and Lono. Well, I think Lono is Osiris. I think Cain is Zeus. Kan, or Cain, represented the god of procreation, and he was worshipped as the ancestor of chiefs and commoners. Cain is the creator and gives life, associated with the dawn, sun, and sky, and no human sacrifice or any hard labor or ritual is needed for the worship of Cain. And he's said to have been involved in creation. There are stories about him. Oftentimes, Kanaloa is also associated with Cain. And the squid or the octopus is a symbol of Kanaloa. So that's interesting too. Like I said, Cain and Kanaloa are complementary powers. Some people compare it to Odin and Tyre, Mitra and Varuna, or Yin and Yang. And Kanaloa is considered to be the god of the underworld and a teacher of magic. And he became the leader of the first group of spirits spit out by the gods. And in time, he led them in a rebellion in which the spirits were defeated by the gods, and as a punishment, they were thrown into the underworld. Well, kind of low, that one almost sounds like Kronos to certain degrees, because Kronos, led the rebellion against Uranus. So, Kanaloa sometimes is depicted as a god of evil or death or underworld, and Cain is portrayed as a good god. So that's almost like a Zeus-Kronos combination. Now, the Eye of Kanaloa is a very interesting symbol. And basically, it consists of a 7-pointed star surrounded by several concentric circles, and that are regularly divided by 8 lines radiating from the innermost circle to the outermost circle. And this symbol is basically the same symbol that the United Nations has. So if you follow my work, and if I have a book called The Sacred Language of Symbolism, and I pretty much, based on my research, believe that that hexagram is a symbol of Cronus, or the Cronide bloodline, as is this Eye of Kanaloa. It actually, too, would, if you look at it, it's like looking down at the Earth with latitude and longitude lines from the top, possibly, of the Earth or any point. So it's almost like symbolic of an eye looking down on the Earth. And like I said, I want to get a little stronger YouTube presence so you can start to see what I'm talking about. I do have some of this out on my blog, and I have it in my books. But, my premise is that this Cronide bloodline established this world order and the mysteries and teachings and all of these mythologies, and their symbols have a lot of meaning, and they come through to even today. Now, when I was in Hawaii, and like I said, I've been to Maui and I've been to Oahu, but when I was in Oahu, I went to Waikiki Beach. And what was very interesting is that there were these stones called the Stones of Life that were on Waikiki Beach, surrounded by a fence, and they vary in size. One's pretty, some of them are pretty large, and one of them was just really tiny. Now, these stones were said to have been brought down by 4 healers who had traveled from other islands as far back as 400 A.D., and they were kahunas, or wizards, and they were skilled in the art of medicine, and they taught. They were effeminate but beautiful, and they taught many healing ways to the people of Oahu and the other Hawaiian islands, and they were said to be very tall, as I said, and somewhat feminine, but gentle. And after healing and teaching healing ways, the legend is that these kahunas said they would impart their power in one of these stones. And people could come and get that power from those stones. And I've got a nice picture of it out on my blog, and I'll put some YouTube vids together. But after time, these stones were covered in sand, but then they've rediscovered them, uncovered it, and protected it. Now, when I was in Hawaii, I also visited a cave, which was used by the high chiefs. And I tried to see if I could find some petroglyphs near the cave, but the tide was pretty high, so I wasn't able to do that. But I went inside the cave, and it's called Spirit Cave. And it wasn't very big, but it was like, I went in by myself. I had some people waiting for me outside. But, unfortunately there was a lot of glass, too, because a lot of people go there and party and goof around, but they really need to respect that. But I didn't feel scared at all. I felt very calm, and strangely, though, I felt like I was being watched when I was in this cave. It was quiet and peaceful, and I wasn't scared, but it's interesting. It wasn't very far from the water either, but I'm glad that that's somewhat, still there and preserved, and I would hope people have a little bit more respect for it. I did see a rope hanging from a top cliff in the cave because I think somebody was trying to climb up it, but I'm sure there's a lot of history in there. Now, that's Hawaii, and like I said, the other Polynesians have the names for their, pretty much the same gods and goddesses, and they all have temples and kahunas. They may use a different word for it, but it's very interesting. Now, another thing is the Maori people of New Zealand. The women have something that they call a poi, which is like a ball on a string that they manipulate around, and it's used for exercising their arms and improving coordination. And it's a woman's exercise. And, they wanted their hands flexible for weaving. And some of the men started to use it for coordination and battle as well. And from this ancient art, there's a lot of people that have created their own version of poi, like an Americanized, where they actually create wicks that they light on fire. And they spin it, and it's just a beautiful art. And or they'll have a rice sack or a sack filled, and it's just a beautiful thing to do. I do it a little bit, and not as good as I'd like to be. I do some other things, but it's fun, and definitely get your arms moving, and it's something very good to do. Well, now that's the Polynesians. Let's move on to Africa and see what I can get done here. I got some time left. Okay. Now, Africa is the second largest and second most populous continent. There's about 1 billion people. There's over 54 recognized states. There's some territories. It accounts for 15% of the world's human population. And the African population has just exploded rapidly over the last 40 years. So the population is relatively young, and half or more of the population is under 25 years of age. Now, the total number of Africans grew from 221 million in 1950 to 1 billion in 2009. So, you're talking about roughly in 50 years, 800 million people more. And that probably has to do with modern medicine being introduced over there. Now, Africa is so large that you could fit several countries inside of it. And depending on who you ask, there's over 3,000 tribes or groups of people throughout Africa. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the tribes, and one of the famous ones is the Dogon. And Dogon are an ethnic group living in Mali, which is the west side of Africa. And the population numbers between about 400 to 800,000. They're best known for their religious traditions, their masked dances, and their wooden sculptures, and, of course, their alleged knowledge of the Sirius star system. And among several oral traditions of the Dogon, one relates to their coming from Mandi, located to the southwest of the Bandiagara encampment. So they really had to leave their original area because of slavery, because of the African and the Arab slave trade and the American slave trade. Now, their religion is animist, although Islam is kind of encroaching in and trying to replace their belief system. But the majority of the Dogon practice is still an animist religion, including the ancestral spirit Nomo. And the festivals and a sect in which Sirius plays an important part is probably what captures most people's attention. The ancestry of the Dogon is through a patrilineal system, and each Dogon community is an enlarged family, and it's headed by a male elder or chief. Now, there are some polygynous marriages, but not usually done. They only it's usually one man to one wife, and that makes sense. I mean, if you got somebody getting 4 wives, 50% birth rate, one guy gets 4 wives, 3 out of the 4 guys get none. So, that to me is a practice that just isn't practical. That's greed, or out of necessity. Now, let's see. The Dogons, they're strongly oriented toward harmony, which is reflected in their rituals. And there are women's rituals and men's rituals. They also practice circumcision, which I'm not real thrilled about. Don't want to get into the detail, but it's circumcision for boys and girls. Okay, they have some elaborate funeral masks, and they have basically several sects that they are divided into. The Amma sect worships the high crater god, and Sigu takes place every 60 years. And it's a long procession that starts and ends in the village. The Levi sect worships the ancestor Libe, Saru, who is the first mortal human being, who in Dogon myth was transformed into a snake. The Benu sect uses totems. The Twin sect, the birth of twins, is a sign of good luck. The Mono sect is an altar. A mono altar is at the entry of every village. And then they have different buildings. A male granary, which is a storage for pearl millet and other grains. A female granary, a storage place for women's things, and the husband has no access to this. The women will put their jewelry, clothes, or some other things in there. Toguna, a building only for men. They rest here throughout the day when it's hot. Okay, and like I said, the Mendi or the Dogon are known for a lot of their symbolism and knowledge of star systems. Now I want to talk about the Mendes and the Mendi people. Hang on one second here. Okay, now, the Mendi people also have, they're in Sierra Leone. They also have different sects, like, let's see. There's male and female priestesses and priests. The Poro prepares men for leadership in the community. And the Mendi women are initiated into the Sandy Society, and that's to teach young women for responsibilities of adulthood. Now, neither of those societies are to tell their secrets to anybody outside of it. So they have their traditions, and they keep it, to themselves. They don't really tell outsiders. The Mendis also have masks, and I actually went down to the Milwaukee, I think it was the art museum. They had some of these masks, and the man's mask has like 2 large antlers, if you will, and that's interesting because the horned, I guess a horn mask or a horn petroglyph is always associated with the male, and the female is almost like a fish top on this mask. It's different. So they have different masks for the male and the female. Okay. They like to dance, and there's a lot of color symbolism in the Mende. And the women's hair in the Mende society is also a sign of femininity. Whereas I know there's other tribes in Africa, and I can't remember the name of it, but women actually remove or shave their hair off, and the men have long hair. And the women wear these very colorful collars that are Egyptian-like. I've got to go back in and try and remember what that tribe is. I can't think of it offhand. Okay. And like I said, the men, they come from Sierra Leone generally, and the women have influence politically in their society. They're not the Mendes, they're not subordinate to men. So they do have political influence. There are female chiefs and war leaders as well. Okay, Ethiopia is another African country I find interesting. It's a country located in the Horn of Africa, and Sudan is one of the countries that borders it. What I find interesting is, Ethiopia is supposed to be one of the oldest locations of human life known to scientists. A lot of anthropologists, have found a lot of ancient remains and have used it in the study of evolution. But the other interesting thing about Ethiopia is they have a royal bloodline that they claim goes back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. And if you look at the general pictures of an Ethiopian versus the royalty, you can see a difference, and the royalty does look Semitic. There's a difference. So I might want to do a little bit more on that, because I've heard there may have been a conquest that came in after that bloodline was established. So what's there right now may not be the original bloodline of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. And that's something I want to look into a little bit more. Now let's talk about the Zulu. They're a South African ethnic group. They have about 10 to 11 million people, mainly living in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Some small numbers live in Zimbabwe and Zambia. Okay, their language is Zulu, which is a Bantu language. And the Zulu kingdom played a major role in South African history during the 19th and 20th century. And under apartheid, Zulu people were classified as third-class citizens. Today, they remain the most numerous ethnic group in South Africa. Right now, what's going on in South Africa is not good either. There's a lot of murder, and there's a lot of attacks on the white people that are there. I don't want to get into that, but things are not very calm and copacetic over there. But going back to the Zulu, they were formed under their leader, Shaka. Shaka was a powerful state, or Shaka formed the Zulu state in 1818, and he was a Zulu king. Now, people have seen the, Shaka. Well, you may have seen the Shaka movie. He wasn't very, I wouldn't say nice, but he wasn't very cooperative. I mean, he took over by force. But he united the group, so he is remembered for that. The Zulu have a sacred person called a Sangoma. And the Sangoma is the Zulu shaman, pretty much. And the Zulu believe in a creator god, Unkulunkulu, who is above interacting in day-to-day human affairs, although this belief appears to have originated from the efforts of early Christian missionaries. So that's possible, too. Traditionally, the more strongly held Zulu belief was in ancestor spirits who had the power to intervene in people's lives for good or ill. And the Zulu recognized several elements to be present in a human being: a physical body, the breath of life, the shadow. Now they say once the umuyo, which is the breath of life, leaves the body, the isithehunzi may live on as an ancestral spirit, only if certain conditions were met in life. Behaving with Ubuntu, or showing respect and generosity towards others, enhances one's moral standing or prestige in the community. One famous Sangumo people may have heard of is Krino Mutwa. He's written several books and done some very interesting videos. And he had a very interesting life as well. Okay, another very interesting ancient African goddess is Mami Wata. She's often shown as possessing African beauty, and that her appearance of her hair ranges from straight, curly to kinky black. In many parts of West and Central Africa, Mami Wata, where Mami means woman and Wata means water, translates to a mermaid. Mami Wata is often described as a mermaid-like figure with a woman's upper body and the hindquarters of a fish or a serpent. Now that's interesting. See, Rhea, the mother goddess, and Kronos could be represented as serpents as well as Zeus. In other tales, Mami Wata is fully human in appearance. The existence and spiritual importance of Mami Wata is deeply rooted in ancient traditions and mythology of the coastal southeastern Nigerians, Ibibo, and Anang people. Mami Wata often carries expensive baubles such as combs, mirrors, and watches. A large snake, which is a symbol of divination and divinity, just like, at the Temple of Delphi, there was the python there, frequently accompanies her, wrapping itself around her and laying its head between her breasts. Other times she may try to pass as completely human. In Yoruba tradition, the mother goddess Yamaja has been recently associated with Mami Wata. Traders in the 20th century carried similar beliefs with them from Senegal to as far as Zambia. Now, let's see. The devotees of Mami Wata in Nigeria often wear red and white clothing, and that represents Mami's dual nature. Intense dancing, accompanied by musical instruments such as African guitars or harmonicas, often forms the core of the Mami Wata worship. Well, that's very similar to what Rhea had, the Korbantes that would dance, and she had the drum. And Mamiwata's association with sex and lust is somewhat paradoxical, linked to one with fidelity. According to a Nigerian tradition, male followers may encounter the spirit in the guise of a beautiful, sexually promiscuous woman, such as a prostitute. Okay. In Nigerian popular stories, Mamiwata may seduce a favored male devotee and then show herself to him later. She then demands his complete sexual faithfulness and secrecy about the matter. Acceptance means wealth and fortune. Rejection spells the ruin of his family, finances, and job. Now, Mamiwata is also associated with healing, just like Rhea. So that's another interesting goddess. Now, just quickly, Voodoo or Voodoo is an indigenous organized religion of coastal West Africa from Ghana to Nigeria. And Voodoo is practiced by the Yu people of eastern and southern Ghana and southern and central Togo. It's distinct from various traditional animistic religions in the interiors of these same countries. Voodoo has come over to Haiti as Haitian Voodoo, and in Louisiana as well. Voodoo cosmology centers around the Voodoo spirits and other elements of divine essence that govern the earth, a hierarchy that range in power from major deities governing the forces of nature and human society to the spirits of individual streams, trees, and rocks, as well as dozens of ethnic Voodoo defenders of a certain clan, tribe, or nation. And Voodoo also can be combined with Catholicism as well. Voodoo recognizes one god with many helpers called Orishas, a single divine creator called Mawa, and Nana Buluku is an androgynous being who in one tradition bore 7 children and gave each rule over a realm of nature. Very interesting. Okay, there are priests and priestesses of Voodoo. And it's still practiced quite a bit today. Okay. Got a few more minutes here. I've also heard about hoodoo. Hoodoo has some spiritual principles and practices similar to the spiritual folkways in Haitian, Cuban, Jamaican, and New Orleans tradition. Hoodoo seems to have evolved in the Mississippi Delta, where the concentration of slaves had been dense. Hoodoo then spread throughout the southeast, as well as the north along the Mississippi, as African Americans left the Delta beginning in the 30s. There's a strong mainstream American prejudice against hoodoo, based on the myth of hoodoo is practiced primarily with selfish, hurtful intentions, or that is related to the worship of the Christian devil, Satan. Okay. And let's see, hoodoo allows people to access supernatural forces to improve their daily lives. Hoodoo helps people attain power or success in many areas of life, including money, love, divination, revenge, health, employment, and necromancy. As in many other spiritual medicinal folk practices, extensive use is made of herbs, minerals, parts of animals' bodies, and other bodily fluids, according to Wikipedia. Shamanism. Okay, let's talk about shamanism. It's a practice in which the practitioner tries to reach an altered state. Now, the term shamanism is an umbrella term that's used today. Most Native Americans don't even use the word shaman or medicine man or woman. They have their own words for their spiritual people. But they're, basically it's shamanism usually involves a person who is chosen to be a shaman, which may go along family lines. It's generally not something that someone chooses to do. And usually a person, they start off getting very sick in their youth, and that's one of the initiations, and then they begin to have a lot of dreams and contact and signs, which are also part of initiation. And when it's recognized that they are to be a shaman, they usually require a lot of training. And the shaman is at the service of their people. It is not a selfish thing to be. In fact, it's a very hard thing to be, and the shaman is tested quite often. And if a person tries to run from their calling, they won't be left alone. Usually their life will be turned upside down until they come to terms that this is what they've been chosen to do. And the shaman converses with the spirit world. There'll be adversaries and allies, and they will go to this shamanic world to get answers. They'll try and heal the sick and give advice to people or to their people. They often have dreams and visions, and usually they have a spirit guide, and a lower guide usually takes the form of an animal. An upper guide would be humanoid. So generally they are the link between the physical realm and the non-physical realm. And when the shaman is initiated, they may even have what they call a shamanic marriage, where their spirit guide basically marries them in the shaman world, and they're bonded. And when the shaman gets older and is sick and ready to die, then there's a part in the way with that spirit guide, and the shaman is allowed to pass on. They no longer will have the abilities that they had and are not required to serve the tribe or the people. And then basically somebody else will be chosen to be the shaman. But shamans, in my opinion, they are dealing with energy and the world you can't see. Okay, now, and shamans may even use certain drugs to get to that point, or they may just use drumming or meditation techniques. Well, today that concludes our discussion. Like I said, sign up and subscribe. Check this out. It may be a couple weeks before I do another show. Until next time we meet, take care.